I'm Vashi Capellos in Ottawa on this Thursday. It's our last show of the year, so we've got a special edition of Power Play for you tonight.
What I'd like to see, Canada become our 51st state. We give them protection.
Who's ready to stand up for Canada with me?
Have you maybe reflected on your leadership style moving forward?
No.
Our Thursday front bench is assembled to unpack the top stories of 2025, from a trade war between neighboring nations to Canada's political landscape. Plus, they're going to share their predictions for the top political story of 2026. Christy Clark, Marco Mendicino, James Moore, and Tony Clement. There they are. They're going to be with us in just moments. Plus, the Prime Minister says any kind of sectoral trade deal with the U.S. is now unlikely before next year's CUSMA review. What does that mean for those tariff-battered sectors? We're going to go one-on-one with Industry Minister Mélanie Joly a little bit later on in the show on that. First, though.
Well, number one, that was the best ad that's ever been run, 12.4 billion views. We wanted to bring it to the attention of the American people. And be very frank, it was President Trump. If he didn't comment on it, rather than 12.4 billion views, it might be 12.4 people viewing it. You know something? I'm in a very different position than Prime Minister. I respect the Prime Minister. He has to sit in front of President Trump. It's easy for me to sit back and say that, and it's a lot more difficult when you're the front line guy that's negotiating with him.
Ontario Premier Doug Ford this morning defending his now pulled anti-tariff ad that U.S. President Donald Trump says led him to terminate trade talks with Canada in October. You'll remember, I'm sure, Prime Minister Mark Carney apologized to Trump for the ad and said he had told Ford not to run it. Trade talks remain on ice as the year wraps up, but Prime Minister Carney did meet privately with Trump and Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum earlier this month. There, we are told they laid out the broad strokes for coming discussions around CUSMA, which is up for review in 2026. Canadian politics this year, both federally and politically, has been influenced in a big, some might even say huge way, by Trump and his tariffs, and is top of mind as premiers meet virtually with the Prime Minister today. It's a trade war that officially began on February 1st when Trump imposed 25% tariffs on Canadian exports. Let's take a look back.
Canada will be responding to the U.S. trade action with 25% tariffs.
What I'd like to see, Canada become our 51st state. As a state, it's different. As a state, it's much different. And there are no tariffs.
Our old relationship with the United States, a relationship based on steadily increasing integration, is over.
Well, I think we're going to have a great relationship. He called me up yesterday. He said, let's make a deal.
Having met with the owners of Canada over the course of the campaign last several months, it's not for sale, won't be for sale ever.
The new Prime Minister is a terrific guy. No, we had a very great meeting and no tension. We want to do what's right for our respective peoples. The Prime Minister knew, everybody knew. The Prime Minister knew what the end was before I went.
Will you see him in APEC? Do you want to meet with him?
I don't want to meet with him. No, I'm not going to be meeting with him for a while.
Trump's tariffs are one of our top stories of the year, and we've got a special year-end edition of the Front Bench panel to talk about their political and economic impact. Former BC Premier Christy Clark is with us. She's a senior advisor with Bennett Jones. Marco Mendicino is former chief of staff to Prime Minister Mark Carney and a former Liberal cabinet minister. He's now senior counsel and strategic advisor for Castles. CTV political analyst and former Conservative Industry Minister James Moore is with us. He's now a policy advisor at Edelman. And Tony Clement served in senior roles in Conservative Prime Minister Stephen Harper's cabinet. He's now CEO of Tony Clement International. Hi, everyone. Very nice to see you tonight. To you all as well. Interesting blast through the past there over the last year, James, that kind of, I guess, reminds us what the expectation and the threat was a year ago versus what has transpired over the last 12 months. As you look back, how would you assess the political impact here in Canada of Trump this year?
Tectonic, right? I mean, the news every day covers the waves. Smart people observe the tides that result in the waves, but I think really important analysis observes the plates that result in the tides that lead to the waves. And the plates have shifted underneath Canada-the U.S. relationship like nothing that we've seen, in any of our lifetimes, for sure. Donald Trump is really an agent of change in a really destructive way. He has shaken Canadian politics, every political party. Donald Trump will be a major fixture in the NDP leadership race as we turn into 2026. He was a major fixture in the Liberal leadership race. dealing with Donald Trump is a major element of the culture within the Conservative movement and the Conservative Party of Canada. Donald Trump is he rains down on everything that is governing in politics because he has been such a shapeshifter in every way in politics. So I don't think you can escape, I think, that analysis and what its consequence will be. And this is only year one of the second term, and there are 3 more years to go. So I think he will continue to be an ominous figure over politics and policy in 2026.
Christy, what do you think has impacted kind of the direction of domestic politics more, the threat of what Donald Trump might do or what he has actually done?
But what he's actually done, and I mean, I don't know if you can separate those two things. I would say, I think this has had a tremendous impact on Canada. No doubt, James is absolutely right about that. But I think there are some positive results of it as well. So think about the fact that Canada is very finally serious about diversifying its economy. We've talked about it since I was a little kid, and that was a long time ago. We need to diversify our markets. We can't just be dependent on the U.S. Well, now finally Canada's taking that seriously. Canadians are looking around and saying, how are we going to create economic growth? And looking at resource development as a very important and meaningful way to do that, which is something Canadians weren't rallying around sufficiently, I don't think, before. So that's a big change. And then look at how this has impacted federal-provincial relations. I mean, you look at where Alberta was in the last days of the Trudeau era, where they were talking about separation and talking about how they wanted to go it alone. They were fed up with Canada. And now we've seen some real moves between Ottawa, Alberta, and other provinces around national unity. So not a good thing to have this happen. But I do think that there are some long-term benefits, in addition to the downsides that James has enumerated, for Canada in finding its feet finally and really wanting to become an international player on its own footing, not just because we're so close to the Americans.
Just sort of jumping off that point, Tony, if I think of the sort of crass politics of it, I don't know if in my life I have ever seen so much political consensus around the kinds of things that Christy talks about. And I don't mean that to say that there's total agreement or that there is consensus, but the fact that as much of it exists around things like pipelines or economic development more broadly or diversifying away from dependence on the United States, like that in of itself is pretty impactful, it feels.
Absolutely correct. And what I would add, though, is that this is a long time coming. This reckoning actually has built up over years and perhaps even a couple of decades. So it's Trump has acted as the megaphone for these issues, but even under Biden, the United States was protecting its own, reshoring as much as it could, setting up barriers. These issues, whether it's Democratic or Republican politics, especially on tariffs, have been around. We have had a reckoning on our military spending this year. Well, that's been around as an issue. I remember President Obama speaking in the House of Commons of Canada saying, guys, you got to spend more on the military. And everybody's all clapping away in the House of Commons. Yeah, good job, Barack. You're absolutely right. And then nothing happened, right? So I think that this has all been built up over time. And as James had referenced Donald Trump as being the one who shakes things up, he's brought it to our front brain attention, which had to happen at some point anyway.
I wonder, thinking just about that, as I heard Tony sort of describe that this has been in the cards for a while, I thought of, I interviewed the governor of Delaware, Marco, a few days ago, who's a Democrat, very much against the tariffs, but very, very forthcoming about the idea that people in his state who support Democrats are also very much bought into the America First ideology from an economic perspective and other ideological perspectives. And he was making the point, it's not just going to go away, even if the Supreme Court decides something and Trump backs off a bit from his tariff regime. What are the implications, do you think, if we take that to be true, for Canadian politics in the more long term?
That we've got to continue on the course that Mark Carney has charted out. And I know that James used the tectonic plates as a metaphor. I'll throw another one out for your viewers, and that is that we find ourselves in a winter classic here between Team Canada and the United States on the ice. And you have Mark Carney arrive on a new shift, putting on the jersey, rallying the country, shielding workers from the instability of the tariff war, certainly providing some stability to the sectors that have been most impacted, and steering the economy towards being more united through major projects in energy and housing and defense. And I think you're quite right, Vashi. This is an unprecedented moment where we are seeing across the aisle multi-partisan cooperation. And that's how we need to carry on. I mean, I think that's the way that we immunize ourselves from the America First approach, which I agree is going to be less driven by one party or the other. So, I mean, this is a time for us to, I think, really capitalize on the fresh energy that Mark Carney has brought. It's not without its challenges. Certainly, Canadians are still feeling it when it comes to the cost of living. But we do have a moment here. And I think there hopefully will be some optimism going into 26.
Well, we're going to continue the discussion and debate maybe about how fresh all of that is after a short commercial break. After that break, we're going to take a look at the ascent of Mark Carney and the resignation of Justin Trudeau, all that changed in the last year to result in a pretty similar headline, which is that the Liberals remain in power. We're going to talk about that next. Stay right there.
I cannot be the one to carry the Liberal standard into the next election.
Have you offered yourself as leader?
I just started thinking about it when you brought it up. I'm back home in Edmonton to declare my candidacy for leader of the Liberal Party and Prime Minister of Canada. You spent years running against Justin Trudeau and the carbon tax, and they're both gone. And we agreed to begin comprehensive negotiations about a new economic and security relationship between our two sovereign countries immediately following the federal election. Who's ready to stand up for Canada with me?
Canadians started this year with Justin Trudeau as Prime Minister, but that changed quickly on January 6th, to be exact, when Justin Trudeau stepped down, saying he didn't have the support of his caucus to stay on. At that point, Liberals were on average between 20 and 30 points behind the Conservatives in public opinion polls. But with the advent of Trump and a new leader as of March in Mark Carney, the tides turned and the Liberals won a fourth consecutive mandate. At the time, a handful of seats short of a majority. Let's bring back the front bench to talk about that. Christy Clark, Marco Mendicino, James Moore, and Tony Clement. Christy, I'll start with you. If we had this conversation a year ago, is this the outcome you think you would have predicted? And what do you attribute to it?
Well, I mean, Pierre Poilievre had the gimme election of all gimme elections. It seemed to me ridiculous, crazy to imagine that Liberals could somehow win the election. We were all thinking, well, how do we save a few seats? Rescue a few seats here. But the thing is that Justin Trudeau had this theory that if they could get NDP votes, then they would win the election. And he was right about that. His method, though, of getting there was saying, we're going to kill resource development. We're going to kill everything from pipelines to aquaculture. And we're going to talk about social justice a whole lot. We ended up with an economy that was like in the ones in terms of growth. And it turns out that New Democrats, as well as a lot of other Canadians, decided, well, you know what? We want jobs. We don't want to be just talked down to. We don't want someone standing in the way of growth. We want jobs. And so, Carney comes in with a proven record on that. Trump on the other side threatening the country. People wanted stability. They wanted to get somebody serious, and they wanted jobs. And so, it was an utterly unexpected outcome, but I think, one where Canadians really decided we got to do a U-turn here, but they wanted somebody serious. And that's how Mark Carney was finally elected at the end of the day. Shocked me as much as everybody else. Unlike some other members of this panel, I might be more happy about it, though, than they are.
Tony, as you look back over the last 8 months, we haven't even hit a year yet since the election or since the Liberal leadership race. What do you think the Prime Minister is doing well, and what do you think he's not doing well?
Yeah, and let me preface my answer, Vashi, by saying that Canadians are reasonable and patient people, so they're going to give Mark Carney the benefit of the doubt for the first segment of his mandate, and that's what Canadians do, and I respect that, and I think all Conservatives respect the election result, despite a little bit of angst about how it all turned out. Having said that, I think that Mark Carney is good at illustrating a changed direction, whether it's on natural resources or on the carbon tax or saying things about fiscal probity in the federal budget. I think the jury, I'm saying this in a very neutral way, but the jury is still out on whether he can achieve all of those things. But again, Canadians are patient. They're going to give him the time. Whether he can do all those things that he says he can do is, in my view, an open question. And there certainly is some evidence that some of them are counter to one another. So I think ultimately Mark Carney is going to have to make decisions. That's what you do in the Prime Minister's chair. And then he will be judged accordingly.
I think one of the things that we've talked about on this panel pretty frequently, Marco, is the size of the ambition described, right? Like the magnitude of it is certainly not what we're used to in politics. I know James has made this point a couple of times, like just saying, you know, we're going to have the fastest growing economy in the G7 and it's going to be this, it's going to be that. Like these are not usually, we set expectations low in politics so that they can be surpassed. How big of a challenge do you think that's going to be for the Prime Minister moving forward?
I think it will be a challenge. I mean, to use the old adage, we campaign in poetry and we govern in prose. And I think managing expectations and executing in delivery will be crucial for 2026. But as I've been watching some of the clips that you've been playing throughout the show so far, I mean, it's a bit of a photo album for me, a bit personal. And it, is encapsulated by a sort of a never say never mentality. A year ago, the Liberal Party was 20 points down. Most people were writing us off into oblivion. I'd announced that I wasn't going to be running again, and then a short few weeks into 2026 had been asked to be the Prime Minister's first Chief of Staff. And, there was a clip there which I think also really captures one of the most pivotal moments in the first months of his tenure, and that was in that bilateral in the Oval Office. And I'm standing over the shoulder of the Prime Minister as he's having his first interactions with Donald Trump. And there was one never, and that was that Canada would never be for sale. And to me, I think that was a real watershed moment to signal to Canadians and to the American administration that this is a Prime Minister who understands how to crisis manage. I mean, he has spent the better part of his professional life doing just that. 2008, in the Great Recession, serving alongside of Prime Minister Harper, and then going to the UK and helping, England navigate Brexit. And so he seems to have been engineered for this moment. And all of the repositioning that we have seen of the Liberal Party, a party that is much more focused on the economy, a party that I think is much more relatable in some ways in this current moment because Canadians are apprehensive. They are anxious about the cost of living and about their future. I think all of that energy is striking a chord with a lot of Canadians. And I want to come back to what James said about the tectonic plates shifting. I think there is also a profound shifting in the tectonic plates that form the political coalitions that make up this government. And so I think 2026 is going to be an interesting year.
Do you think that's the case, James? That, I mean, I think to maybe put like even a finer point on it, Canadians might be asking themselves, like, are we in for a two-party system for the foreseeable future? Like, is it going to be an option between Liberals and Conservatives who, from a policy perspective, have less of a contrast than they did a year and a half ago?
As usual, Vashi, I think you put your finger on it, and I agree with Marco. I think for Prime Minister Carney, we'll talk about Pierre, I think, in a later segment. But as I think about Prime Minister Carney going into 2026, I think he has a decision to make. Christie mentioned about the coalition that came together to get him elected in April of this year. And it really was, he has borrowed voters from progressives who really didn't like Donald Trump and who really didn't like Pierre Poilievre and the idea of him becoming prime minister. And a lot of progressive voters lent their votes to Mark Carney in a defensive posture. And they're waiting to see some receipts. And they're not getting a lot of receipts. You see a prime minister who is increasing military spending to $81 billion, who's buying F-35s, we think, but growing procurement in any event, is offending the center-left progressive environmental movement with his moves on carbon pricing and so on. So, I mean, and he's pro-pipeline now, et cetera. So I think for Prime Minister Carney, as he goes into 2026, and he thinks about the mandate and where it came from in April of 2025, 2026 is about, is he going to do a progressive pivot and try to retain those NDP voters, or is he going to double down and really be a progressive conservative? If he's going to do a progressive pivot, I think you have to look in the first half of certainly 2026 and see if he's going to tack left on other things that he hasn't talked about yet, whether it's, culture policy, whether it's standing up to the Americans on the online streaming app. There are things that he can do on social policy, maybe a guaranteed annual income, expanded childcare. I don't know. But is he going to do a progressive pivot and try to hold on to those NDP voters, or is he going to try and seize the middle ground and become really kind of a blue, liberal, red, Tory, progressive conservative and try to straddle the broad middle? And is that ground available? There's a because he can't have both. He has to choose. And I think politically we'll see what he does in 26.
Just very quickly, a quick follow-up. Do you think that ground is available?
We'll see. I mean, I think there are a lot of Canadians. I think Marco touched on it, right? There are a lot of Canadians who have shed their old partisan fight because they realize that Donald Trump really is something different. He's not just another president. And when Canadians, as Christie said, they want the prime minister to broaden our global market access and sell our products to more than just 97% of what we sell for energy goes to the United States. They want to see it to go to more countries, not just because we need to, but because we want to. We don't want to just sell to Americans anymore, not just because it's a better economic opportunity, but because we're offended. We're not a 51st state. We're an independent, proud country with a sturdy past and a bright future, and we don't want to do business with Americans right now. And we're not going to do it for a long time. So I think a lot of people are prepared to shed the old sort of culture war, partisan, red, blue, orange veneer that we have on politics and fight a fight that's worth fighting, which is putting country first. And I think there's a great appeal to that. And I think the Prime Minister he has some choices to make about how he holds that together.
Okay, I've got to take a quick commercial break, as James promised. Christie, I see you shaking your head. Don't worry, we got lots more time. After that break, we're going to take a deep dive into what that means for other parties, including the Conservatives and their leader, Pierre Poilievre. We're back with more of The Front Bench to talk about that next.
The night I attended the Conservative Party, I was truly a Conservative member and an MP. I have not made a decision at that point. And so it wasn't until I had the opportunity to confirm my understanding of Prime Minister Carney's approach and his vision for Canada. On the day the announcement was made was when I met with the Prime Minister and reconfirmed my understanding of his vision for Canada, and I believe that's the right approach.
Former Conservative MP Michael Maw speaking exclusively to our affiliate CP24 this morning about his decision to cross the floor to the Liberal Party. As you heard there, Maw insists he had not made up his mind about the decision the night before when he was at the Conservative Christmas party. Maw is the second MP Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre has lost to the Liberals in the last 6 weeks. Just minutes after the federal budget was tabled, Chris D'Entremont crossed the floor, later saying Poilievre's leadership was partly to blame for his decision. 2 days later, Alberta MP Matt Genereux said he would be resigning as an MP next year, though staying in caucus until spring. Multiple sources at the time told CTV News he was going to defect to the Liberals, but ultimately made the decision to step down altogether. Now, Michael Maw's decision to join the Liberals has put the party, as you can see there, 1 seat away from a majority government and has prompted speculation on Parliament Hill about whether or not other MPs could follow suit. 1 year ago, as we've talked about, Pierre Poilievre appeared to be on the cusp of winning a majority Conservative government. Here's a look back.
Look, this has got to be the biggest political gathering of the 21st century.
question. I think to have 10 or 15,000 people at one political rally, this is a movement like we've never seen because people want change.
Will you look at the camera in the eye and apologize to the many people who suffered as a result of the inflationary policies that you advised Justin Trudeau to implement?
I know you want to be running against Justin Trudeau. Justin Trudeau isn't here.
Canadians have opted for a razor-thin minority government.
You lost 2 MPs the week of the budget. One cited your leadership as a reason for leaving. Have you maybe reflected on your leadership style moving forward?
No, my plan is to continue to lead.
Poilievre is facing a leadership review at his party's convention in Calgary at the end of January. And will he survive the vote is the question. What's in store for the Conservatives more largely in 2026? We'll bring back the front bench for those questions. Christy Clark, Mark Mendicino, James Moore, and Tony Clement. Tony, I'll start with you. Listening to those clips, it was a reminder that a couple of things can be true at the same time. I think it is fair to say that Pierre Poilievre's leadership of the party, his focus on an issue set, particularly around cost of living, helped drive the election results to be, a massive gain for the Conservatives. And I think you can directly attribute a lot of that to him. At the same time, it's impossible to ignore the events of the last 6 weeks, those MPs leaving, and the fact that, while the party's numbers remain as strong as they were during the election as far as popular support goes, his own are distinctly behind the Prime Minister's on from a personal public opinion basis. How do you reconcile those two things?
Yeah, let me say a couple things. First of all, it's not unusual for the leader of the opposition to be lower, sometimes much lower than the Prime Minister and preferred Prime Minister. Usually when you're into a change election, that doesn't really alter until 10 or 15 days before Election Day. So I don't think anybody should be concerned about that. You're right that the bottom line numbers are fairly static. Conservatives won 41% of the popular vote in the last election, which was the highest total since 1988. There were new Canadians that voted for us in larger numbers, young people, blue-collar workers, Ontarians in Northern Ontario and Southwestern Ontario. So there's a lot of things that actually worked for Pierre Poilievre. And I've gone on record actually saying if the election was just 1 week longer, I think our message of change and of cost of living and those issues that Pierre was accentuating would have taken us over into at least a minority government. But that isn't the way it was, of course. But I think that my message to your viewers is that Canada needs Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives now more than ever. And he continues to focus on the issues that are increasingly, by that same polling that you're referring to, that Canadians are concerned about. Cost of living, cost of housing, cost of groceries, crime in our neighborhoods, these kinds of issues are the ones that the Conservatives are focused on. And I think ultimately, with a little bit of patience and not turfing out a leader immediately after losing an election, which we've done 3 times already, and that hasn't actually worked out for us, I think most partisan Conservatives want to see Pierre continue and continue to grow.
I guess the question just jumping off of that, Marco, is, and I'll sort of reframe how I initially posed it to Tony, he is a huge asset to the party, but it is apparent through other events that have occurred since, or even the loss of his own seat, he can also be a liability. How are those two things reconciled in your view, or can they be?
I'm not sure, and I think my esteemed colleagues on the panel, James and Tony, and I'm sure many members of their party are really wrestling with that question. I think James had some really smart insights into the distinction between, the people who are more concerned with driving a political movement as opposed to those who want to be nation builders. And there's something that Tony said that I want to pick up on, which is that there are many, many people, it seems to me, on the outside looking in within the Conservative Party that do want Pierre to succeed. And in their view, the way for him to succeed is to grow, to evolve. But in the clips that you are playing, Pierre just seems to want to resist that notion, that advice. And I think it's because he believes that steadiness and firmness and resoluteness and projecting that unswerving quality is the way that he is going to eventually rally those Canadian voters who are still out there to be persuaded. I'm not sure that is working, and certainly on the numbers as you've reported them, it doesn't seem to me that it is. So look, Christmas break holidays are always a great time to go home, have some meals, see your loved ones, kind of, exercise, do whatever it is that you do to distract yourself, and think hard about the year that is ahead. And I think Pierre's obviously got some reflecting to do.
What do you see as the challenge ahead for Poilievre, James?
Well, I mean, frankly, it's a challenge that all opposition leaders have, which is you have to push and pull at the same time. You have to be, in our system of government, you have to be critical of the government on a daily basis, hopefully in a constructive way that gives a sense to the public that if you were in government, you would do it in a 5%, 10% better way, a smarter way, a more efficient way, a more thoughtful way. So you have to be negative all the time, but at the same time, you have to then pivot back to then presenting yourself as a pan-Canadian, bilingual, thoughtful, continental and global leader who has a vision for everybody. So you go from being negative one day to having to be this bigger voice. There's no question, I think, that Pierre has been a very successful opposition leader. And to borrow a phrase by our friend Paul Wells, he says the thing about being a really good opposition leader is if you're really, really good at it, the voters might want to attempt to keep you there. And so to break away from that and to present yourself as the CEO of a G7 country and a government, it's a very difficult thing to do. But it can be done. And as Tony's analysis reminds us, the last election was actually very close. If in the next election one of these two things happens, Pierre becomes prime minister. If 1 in 20 people who voted Liberal in the last election switch to Conservative, Pierre wins. If 1 in 4 traditional New Democrats who went Liberal goes back to the New Democratic Party, Pierre wins a minority government. So the margin for him to rise or fall is very narrow, but the task is in front of him. He can do it. The margin is there. He can grow. He can become prime minister. But that delicate daily balance of being aggressive and tough in opposition while wanting to be seen to be managerially competent and have a proactive, positive vision, it's a hard push-pull, and not a lot of people pull it off.
Mm-hmm. Last word to you on that, Christy, and then I want to try to get in one quick round of what you guys think the big story next year will be on this subject of Mr. Poilievre. To you, Christy.
Yeah, so honestly, I was surprised he didn't resign on election night as leader because, blowing a lead that was that big and, when his party was depending on him, they had all this money, they had all this support, and, they ran a really good campaign. I was surprised that he decided to stick around. I think he probably would have done the right thing by his party had he given an opportunity for a refresh there. But it's quite true. When you're in opposition, you can't demonstrate that you are going to be a leader. You can only really demonstrate that you can really oppose things. And the problem that I think Canadians had with Mr. Poilievre was that he seemed like he was all politics all the time. He wasn't about leading. He wasn't about governing. He seemed like he came across like a guy who just wanted to fight. And, Trump came along and Justin Trudeau went away and Canadians decided that it was time for a serious leader. And I think it is going to be very difficult for Mr. Poilievre to be able to change the way he is thought of by Canadians. Now, he might be saved by the fact that, because James and I don't often disagree, but on this idea that the NDP will disappear, I think we very much do disagree. I don't think the NDP are going anywhere. And if Mark Carney doesn't fulfill all of his or much of his promises, if the public sector unions get very, very upset with him over time, and if some of the environmental groups decide to get behind them again, the NDP may decide that they want to wipe out that NDP vote. So he could get lucky, but I think it's going to be a difficult hill for him to climb in the next few years to look credible, to look positive, but also remain who he is and who he seems incapable of changing, the areas in which he seems incapable of changing.
Well, my own managerial capabilities are limited because I've run out of time to get to what the big stories next year are. So I will hopefully Hopefully we can save them and start off the new year in January when we reconvene with your predictions. I appreciate all of you lending us so much of your time and your analysis tonight and all year. I appreciate it from the bottom of my heart, and I wish you all the merriest of Christmases and a happy holiday season. Thank you.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, Vashi.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks to our front bench, Christy Clark, James Moore, Tony Clement, and Marco Mendocino. Coming up, Prime Minister Mark Carney says the sectoral tariff deals that could have been are now unlikely as Canada heads toward a CUSMA review next year. What is the domestic strategy for those sectors being hit by those tariffs? Industry Minister Melanie Joly joins me next.
My judgment is that is now going to roll into the broader CUSMA negotiations. So we're unlikely, given the time horizons coming together, to have a sectoral agreement. Although, if the United States wants to come back on that in those areas, we're always ready there. We're very ready.
Prime Minister Mark Carney suggesting there will not be tariff relief for targeted Canadian sectors anytime soon. Instead, affected industries, namely lumber, steel, and aluminum, will likely have to wait until CUSMA negotiations next year. With me now to talk about the Canadian response to that is Industry Minister Melanie Joly. Hi, Minister. Pleasure to welcome you back to the program. Thank you so much for making the time.
Thank you. Thank you, Vashi. It's a pleasure.
I wanted to start off just on some comments that the Prime Minister made today about the state of negotiations with the United States. He said that we are unlikely to see any sectoral deals in advance of the CUSMA review process. And I wanted to ask you about those sectors that are affected by tariffs because you oversee them in your capacity as Minister for Industry. When I asked one of your cabinet colleagues, Patty Hajdu, to describe the approach your government was taking to those battered sectors, she described it as saving the furniture, pardon me. Is that your government's strategy?
Well, of course, we're there to support the workers. And we know that the steel sector, for example, doesn't have a business model for that is sustainable like it used to have when exporting to U.S. automakers. So right now what we're doing with the steel sector is we're helping them to adapt and pivot to do the right steel that Canadians need, mainly in the defense sector, mainly for infrastructure and housing. Imagine that. We didn't produce the right type of steel to make sure that we could build our own ships in Canada. Well, we have shipyards in Halifax and Vancouver and Quebec that uses a more enormous amount of steel, and we didn't have the right steel to actually build infrastructure in the country. So that's why I'm working with them, the steel sector, the auto sector, the aluminum sector, the lumber sector, and finally the copper one, to make sure that they can change their business model, take more risks, while helping the 200,000 workers that are affected by the tariffs.
Are you, and I ask with great respect, is your government working fast enough to do that? And that's not to take away from the intent behind it. But I'll pick two examples. It took about 6 months of 50% tariffs on Canadian steel and months of those companies enduring a closed American market for your government to most recently announce more substantial restrictions on the imports of steel from elsewhere. And when I spoke to the mayor of Sault Ste. Marie following, for example, the news out of Algoma just a few weeks ago, he was anxious to know more about the defense industrial policy and the strategy that would unfold and what it would mean potentially for a company like Algoma. But he said his efforts to get more information from your government were at the time unfounded. Could your government or should your government be moving faster?
Well, since you spoke to him, I went to Algoma Steel in Sault Ste. Marie 10 days ago. I sat down with the mayor, and he's very much attuned to what we're doing right now. And I've been in contact with Algoma's CFO, which will be the new CEO very soon. I've been in contact with the union leaders, and we're bringing back 500 jobs at Algoma. Based on what? Based on the fact that they will have a new plate mill for the defense sector and a new beam mill for the infrastructure and housing sectors. And at the same time, the union has asked us to do more on reskilling of these workers, and we will do that working with the province of Ontario. All that to say, we are indeed in an emergency. We know we're over-dependent on the US, and we know it's a big exposure. So we're going extremely fast. I was actually a bit earlier in Montreal today, presenting what have we done in the past 2 months since I announced our plan that would be to protect jobs, create jobs, and attract talent and investment. And when it comes to protect jobs, we've been able to close the market to dumping, make sure that companies would have access to liquidity and support. And also we're building this much more important domestic market based on our Buy Canada policy that came into force 2 days ago. So we're going at the speed of light, I must say.
Are you sure that those 500 jobs will be protected? There's 1,000 overall that were lost. When I spoke to the CEO, I asked him about, your government's position around, for example, those employees working in a different capacity, and he was unequivocal that he hoped that could be the case, but that he could not guarantee it.
Well, I think Garcia, the CEO, is leaving, and there was a new leadership coming in. We've had conversation with the new leadership with the fact that they would be coming up with a new business plan for the 2 mills I was talking to you for the defense and housing sector. And we'll be receiving a proposal very soon. I'm expecting in January. But what I want to do also is to bring the union on board. I want the workers to be part of this process. The trust between the employees and the companies is pretty much at zero at this point. And it's a real issue. It's affecting the entire community. And we need to make sure that basically everybody is on board, because it's the entire Sault Ste. Marie community that is affected. So this is something I take very, very seriously. It's very dear to my heart. And I'm putting a lot of time and energy into this.
And I certainly do take that point about the union and the company. When we spoke to the union, they also had lost trust in the government, but also had questions, in particular about the financial support, the loans that were provided. I understand that the loans were provided in order to provide a lifeline to Algoma, right? And that part of what enables Algoma to move forward is the retooling of that plant that involves these significant layoffs. Are there any conditions attached, though, to that loan beyond the 1,000 layoffs? Like, are there any guarantees in exchange for this public money, this taxpayer money, that more jobs will not be lost?
Well, we're now looking at forward, and forward, any support from the government will be linked to actually making sure that there are 500 jobs that are being recreated. And I'm into dealing with what is next. And at the same time, my job is not to defend the company because I'm very much aware of the impacts on the workforce, but there is an entire tariff war that is a trade war that, and Sault Ste. Marie is victim of that trade war. And so that's why we will be working with the company to make sure that we can create these 500 jobs. And not only that, the defense sector in Canada really, really needs that steel. And so I really think that the tough days are behind us. We can look forward and we can build a very strong steel sector for Canada. But I'm very much aware that we have to be extremely cautious, because the confidence between the community, the company is very tenuous.
Why weren't those conditions, even insofar as those 500 jobs, why weren't they attached to the initial $400 million loan? And was that an oversight on your government's part? Well,
I think that the negotiation at the time was done through the Minister of Finance, along also with the province, and the goal was to offer a lifeline to the company, because if it wasn't for that, the company would have basically gone into bankruptcy. And so the deal was to make sure, as there's 3,000 jobs, that we could at least help the company get out of it. Let's all remember that Algoma was not going well before the trade war started. And so it was already vulnerable before, but at the same time, we can't let down the steel plant. Why? Because we need to make sure that we have at least one Canadian-owned steel plant, which is Algoma. And we need also to have steel in a country for two reasons. First, there's no industrialized country that really doesn't make steel. So it's fundamental for any form of very strong economy to be able to produce steel. And second, if one day Canada is in a conflict, we need to be able to produce steel. That is a sovereign capability we need. It's a question of national security. And so that's why I know that it is a tough decision. Sometimes we're confronted with difficult decisions when we govern, but we took that decision to make sure basically that the company could survive, and at the same time we could afterwards look ahead and create new jobs in Sault Ste. Marie.
Just before I let you go, Minister, I know you're a federal Liberal, but you're coming to us from Quebec. Provincially, the Liberals have really been through it, you could say, over the last 24 hours. I was looking at public opinion polling that showed, a precipitous drop since the last month for the Liberals to the advantage of the PQ. And I think a lot of Canadians right now are wondering what that means for the future of Quebec sovereignty. Are you, Minister, worried about a referendum?
I take extremely seriously the fact that the PQ government is ahead in the polls, and that the head of the PQ has clearly stated that within a year of his new mandate, that he would indeed call a referendum for the separation of Quebec. As a federal politician that has been on the front lines of this issue for years, this would not be not only to the benefit of Quebecers, but this would have an impact also on our entire economy. And so I will make sure that the Federalist views and the importance of being part of Canada is well heard, and I'll work with my cabinet colleagues, but this is certainly something that I will be dedicating a lot of time and energy in the next year, and that's also one of the reasons I wanted to come back to the country after being a lot at the international level.
Could you ever be convinced to run to replace Mr. Rodriguez if that question of sovereignty is kind of at the core of it, or have you totally ruled it out?
Listen, I've received many calls, many texts, a lot of people that have been pushing me to go, but my job also is to be the Minister of Industry, so I've said no.
Okay, I'll leave it on that note. Happiest of holidays to you, Minister. I appreciate making the time tonight. Thank you, as always.
Thank you. Pleasure. Thank you. Bye-bye.
That is Federal Industry Minister Melanie Joly. We'll take a quick commercial break here on Power Play. We've got more of our show after that break. Stay right there. Welcome back to Power Play. A couple of things I wanted to note before we close out the evening. First of all, the premiers met with the Prime Minister this afternoon. That meeting wrapped just a little while ago. We are anticipating a readout at some point this evening from the Prime Minister's office. As soon as we get it, we will, of course, share it with you. This was the first time that all the premiers had convened with the Prime Minister since the signing of that memorandum of understanding on a potential pipeline on energy and climate between Alberta and the federal government. That's an MOU that the Premier of BC was not too happy with, so we're looking for some details that we can ascertain about really how all of that went. And again, once we get it, we will share them with you. I also want to make note, because this is my last Power Play of the year. Mike will be here tomorrow, so he's got one more edition of the show. I wanted to say thank you very much to everyone who works on this show from the bottom of my heart. They put so much into it, led by Rachel Swatek-Sang, Samantha Pope, and Stephanie Ha. An entire crew of people who work behind the scenes here technically to get the show to air. Another entire crew of people in Toronto who do the exact same thing. And then, of course, our whole bureau here in Ottawa. My thanks to them, and my thanks to you for watching. Happiest of holidays.